Please just pretend you're hugging me so I can escape, the desperate boy whispered to a stranger, completely unaware that this man was a billionaire who would change his life forever. Before we dive into this incredible journey, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and if you've ever been in a situation where a stranger made a difference in your life. Let's begin our story. December snow fell heavily on the sidewalks of downtown Detroit, transforming the city into a maze of white concrete and Christmas lights that blinked sadly against the gray sky. Michael Thompson pulled his Italian wool coat tighter as he walked aimlessly through the financial district, his therapist's words still echoing in his mind. Mike, you can't just exist. Living and existing are completely different things. 15 months. 15 months since the car accident that took Emma and the baby they were expecting. 15 months since his life transformed from a corporate fairy tale into an empty existence, driven only by automatic meetings and corporate decisions that no longer meant anything. At 32, Michael had built Thompson Dynamics, a technology company valued at $3 billion. But now, walking through Detroit's icy streets, he felt like a ghost in his own life. His Armani leather shoes stepped mindlessly into puddles of melted snow that he didn't even bother to avoid. The sound of small, hurried footsteps broke through his fog of self-pity. Desperate, childlike running, approaching. Michael looked up just as a small figure collided with his legs, nearly knocking him down. "Please," a breathless voice whispered urgently. "Please, sir, just pretend you're hugging me." Michael looked down, stunned. A little boy, maybe 8 years old, with disheveled brown hair and clothes that clearly had seen better days, was pressed against him. His green eyes were wide with terror, looking frantically over Michael's shoulder. "Ethan! Ethan Davis! Get back here right now!" A harsh voice shouted behind them. The boy, Ethan, looked at Michael with pleading eyes that carried too much fear for a child. "Please," he whispered again, "just for a minute, pretend I'm your son." Something in the child's desperate voice, something in those eyes that reflected terror no child should know, made the decision for Michael. Without thinking consciously, he wrapped the trembling boy in his arms, pulling him protectively close. "Ethan, sweetheart," he said loudly, his voice carrying the natural authority he had learned from years of high-level negotiations. "There you are. Daddy was looking everywhere for you." Two men in dark uniforms approached, their faces red from cold and irritation. Michael instantly recognized them from the patches on their uniforms. Security from the Riverside Youth Facility, the overcrowded state facility on the south side of the city. "Sir," the taller guard panted, steam coming from his mouth in the cold air. "That's one of our residents. He escaped during supervised recreation." Michael felt Ethan's small hands grip his coat with desperate force. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, "but I think you're mistaken. This is my son, Ethan Thompson." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Michael's expensive suit, his confident posture that naturally commanded respect, the way he spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to having his words accepted without question, everything suggested wealth and power. "Sir, we have records," the shorter guard began hesitantly. "Are you questioning my identification of my own son?" Michael's voice carried enough steel to make both men instinctively step back. "Because if you are, I'm sure my lawyers at Patterson and Associates would be very interested in discussing this." The taller guard cleared his throat nervously. The mention of Detroit's prestigious law firm made them hesitate. "Of course not, sir. There must have been some mistake. The boy we're looking for has darker hair." As the guards retreated, muttering apologies and confused explanations between themselves, Michael felt Ethan's desperate grip relax slightly, but the boy didn't let go. And something deep in Michael's chest, something that had been frozen for 15 months, began to crack like ice under spring sun. "Thank you," Ethan whispered against his coat, his voice muffled but loaded with pure gratitude. Michael looked down at this brave little boy who had somehow stumbled into his life at the exact moment he was questioning whether there was still any reason to keep living. "You're welcome, Ethan, but I think we need to talk." And as snow continued to fall around them, creating a white cocoon that separated them from the rest of the world, neither realized that this desperate embrace would be the beginning of something that would save them both. But first, they needed to survive what was coming, because escaping from the Riverside Youth Facility was just the beginning of Ethan's problems. And Michael Thompson was about to discover that some rescue missions change the rescuer as much as the rescued. Michael guided Ethan through the elegant lobby of the Ritz-Carlton Detroit, very aware of the curious looks from other guests. The boy's worn sneakers made small noises against the polished marble floor, and he kept his head down, shoulders defensively hunched, as if expecting someone to grab him at any moment. The contrast between Ethan's ragged clothes and the hotel's luxury was almost painful to observe. "Mr. Thompson," the concierge greeted respectfully, his professionally trained eyes barely registering Ethan's appearance. "Your presidential suite is ready." "Thank you, David." Michael's voice remained controlled, but his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. What was he doing? He had just committed what was essentially interference with legal custody, helping a child escape from legitimate authorities. But something about the pure terror in Ethan's eyes had awakened protective instincts he didn't know he still possessed after months of emotional dormancy. In the elevator, Ethan finally broke the silence, stretching between them. "Why did you help me?" His voice barely rose above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break this unexpected refuge. Michael studied the boy's reflection in the elevator's polished brass doors. Despite everything, the fear, exhaustion, obvious neglect in his clothes and general appearance, Ethan's chin maintained a stubborn tilt that painfully reminded Michael of Emma. His late wife possessed the same fierce determination, that absolute refusal to surrender, even when the odds were impossible. "Why did you run away?" Michael asked in response. "They were going to separate me from my little brother Ryan," Ethan whispered, his small hands clenching into tight fists. "He's only 6 years old. He can't survive there without me. He has nightmares every night about our parents and won't eat if I'm not there to make sure he's safe." The elevator opened on the penthouse floor with a soft chime. Michael's suite was a testament to his phenomenal success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the snow-covered city, Italian leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars, a gourmet kitchen he rarely used, and artwork on the walls worth millions. Ethan stopped at the entrance, completely overwhelmed by opulence he had never imagined existed. "Who is Ryan?" Michael asked gently, leading Ethan to the luxurious sofa that could easily seat 10 people. "My younger brother. We've been together at Riverside for a year and a half since—" Ethan stopped abruptly, his small hands twisting anxiously in his lap. "They said a family wants to adopt Ryan, but not me. I'm too old. They said 8 years is too old, that nobody wants older kids who ask too many questions." Michael's chest tightened with an emotion he thought had died with Emma. Pure, righteous anger on behalf of another person's pain. "And you've been taking care of him this whole time? Someone has to take care of him," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly, revealing the enormous weight this 8-year-old boy carried on his shoulders. "He has nightmares about the fire, about Mom and Dad not being here anymore. He won't eat if I don't remind him. He gets scared when the older kids are mean to him." Tears began rolling down Ethan's cheeks. "I can't let them take Ryan away from me. He's all I have left in the whole world." For the first time in 15 months, Michael felt genuine purpose blooming in his chest, pushing through the thick fog of grief that had consumed him. "Ethan," he said carefully, "what if I told you there might be a different way? What if we could find a solution that keeps you and Ryan together permanently?" Ethan's eyes widened with hope so pure and desperate it almost broke Michael's heart. "You would do that for us? But you don't even know us." "I'm going to try with everything I have," Michael said, and for the first time since Emma's funeral, he meant something with every fiber of his being. "But first, you need hot food and a safe place to rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out exactly how to save your brother and make sure you're never separated again." As Ethan finally allowed himself to relax into the luxurious sofa cushions, Michael realized that for the first time since Emma's death, he had something truly worth fighting for. Actually, two things: Ethan and Ryan. And he would move heaven and earth to protect these two children. But he had no idea how dark the forces against them really were, or that saving these children would require much more than just money and influence. The next morning, Michael sat in the mahogany-lined office of his longtime lawyer, James Chen, overlooking Detroit's downtown loop. James's expression grew increasingly concerned as Michael explained the previous day's events, his well-manicured fingers drumming nervously on the leather desk, a nervous habit Michael recognized from 2 decades of legal battles together. "Let me understand this correctly," James said slowly, removing his gold-rimmed glasses to clean them meticulously. "You want to adopt 2 children you met yesterday, one of whom is technically a fugitive from state custody, and you're asking me to make this happen immediately?" "Ethan isn't a fugitive, James. He's a terrified little boy trying to protect his younger brother from a system that has catastrophically failed both of them." James leaned back in his leather chair, studying his most successful client with genuinely concerned eyes. "Michael, I understand you're still processing your grief over Emma and the baby, but this isn't the way to fill that emotional void. Taking on severely traumatized children isn't grief therapy, and it's certainly not what Emma would have wanted for you." "This has nothing to do with filling voids," Michael interrupted sharply, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "These children desperately need help, and I'm in a position to provide it. I have unlimited financial resources, a stable home, and time to dedicate completely to their healing." "The state won't see it that way," James replied, with the brutal frankness of a 2-decade friend. "You're a single man with no parenting experience, and frankly, your mental state since the accident has been—" His voice softened with genuine concern. "You've barely left your penthouse in 6 months. You've missed critical board meetings. Your assistant fields calls from worried investors weekly. The press is starting to ask questions about Thompson Dynamics' leadership stability." Michael stood abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city. "My mental state is perfectly stable. I'm functioning normally. I'm making business decisions. I'm managing all my responsibilities." "You're surviving, not living," James said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of true friendship. "There's a fundamental difference. I'm genuinely worried about you, but taking on severely traumatized children isn't the solution to your own pain. The adoption process alone could take years, assuming the state even considers you an eligible candidate." Michael turned to face his friend and legal counsel. "They're not broken projects to be fixed, James. They're brave survivors who have been let down by every adult who should have protected them. If I don't fight for them, who will?" Back at the hotel suite, Michael found Ethan curled up beside the enormous panoramic windows, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, despite several bags of new clothes he had ordered delivered during the morning. The boy looked impossibly small against the impressive backdrop of Detroit's skyscrapers, a small, vulnerable figure dwarfed by a world too big and cruel for someone his age. "How did it go with your lawyer?" Ethan asked quietly, not turning from the window where he watched the snowfall. Michael sat carefully beside him on the cushioned window seat, noticing how Ethan instinctively tensed before forcing himself to relax. "It's going to be complicated. The legal system wasn't designed for situations like this. There are bureaucratic procedures, mandatory waiting periods, extensive psychological evaluations." Ethan nodded with the resigned wisdom of someone who had learned too early that adults make promises they can't keep. "It's okay. I understand completely. You tried to help, and that's more than anyone else has ever done for me and Ryan." "Ethan, look at me," Michael said firmly. He waited until the boy's green eyes met his, seeing the fragile hope that Ethan was trying so desperately to protect from another disappointment. "I said complicated, not impossible. I don't give up easily on important things. Ask anyone who's ever tried to compete against Thompson Dynamics in business. I fight until I win, especially when it comes to protecting people I love. For the first time since they met, Ethan smiled. Really smiled. A genuine smile that completely lit up his young face. So what do we do now? Now we're going to visit Ryan officially as your potential new family, Michael said, picking up his phone and scrolling through a contact list representing decades of accumulated favors and carefully cultivated political influence. I'm going to call in all my political and financial credits. By the end of today, I want to understand exactly what we're fighting against and how we're going to win this battle. Hudi, Ethan threw his thin arms around Michael in a fierce, desperate hug, and Michael felt something he had forgotten existed. Pure hope mixed with fierce determination, and the simultaneously terrifying and exciting knowledge that he finally had something truly worth fighting for again. The Riverside Youth Facility squatted like a concrete grey fortress in Detroit's neglected South Side. Its narrow windows with metal bars and high fence topped with barbed wire made the building look more like a minimum security prison than a place meant to nurture and protect vulnerable children. Michael's gleaming black Bentley looked absurdly out of place in the pothole-filled parking lot, drawing suspicious stares from the few staff visible through the building's dirty, stained windows. "I don't want to go back in there," Ethan whispered, gripping Michael's hand hard enough to leave marks. His entire small body trembled violently as they approached the entrance that looked more like a devouring mouth. "It smells like cheap disinfectant and sadness, and the walls are always cold, no matter the season. You won't have to stay here," Michael promised with absolute conviction, squeezing the boy's hand reassuringly. "We're just visiting Ryan, remember? Just long enough to let him know someone is finally seriously fighting for both of you." Director Beverly Walsh was a stern woman in her early 50s who clearly viewed Michael with deep suspicion, despite his obviously expensive suit and evident wealth. Her office was Spartanly functional, decorated only with faded motivational posters about how discipline builds character and a single wilted plant that seemed to mirror the dying hope of the children under her questionable care. "Mr. Thompson," Walsh said, her tone suggesting anything but genuine appreciation. "I acknowledge your sudden interest in adoption, but I must inform you that Ethan Davis is not available for family placement. He has exhibited serious behavioral problems that make him completely unsuitable for integration into any normal family environment." "What kind of behavioral problems specifically?" Michael asked, his sharp business instincts immediately suspicious of such deliberately vague accusations. "Repeated flight, consistent defiance of authority figures, total inability to adjust to our established disciplinary structure and basic living rules. He has been consistently disruptive to the placement opportunities of other more cooperative children." Walsh's tone was cutting and professional, but Michael caught something more sinister underneath the surface. Genuine antipathy toward an 8-year-old child. "He constantly questions our administrative decisions, deliberately undermines our qualified staff, and has proven completely incapable of accepting age-appropriate discipline." Michael felt Ethan shrink beside him, trying to become invisible under the weight of accusations. "He's 8 years old," Michael said with controlled but dangerous voice. "Age doesn't excuse consistently destructive and disrespectful behavior, Mr. Thompson," Walsh replied coldly. "However, his brother Ryan is an absolutely excellent candidate for adoption. Well-behaved, adaptable, obedient, with no history of significant problems or challenges. Several respectable families have expressed genuine interest in him." They were led through sterile corridors lined with motivational posters that seemed cruelly ironic given the obvious despair of the place. "Every day is a new beginning," hanging directly above a water stain spreading across cracked ceiling tiles. "Persistence builds character," beside a door that clearly hadn't opened in months. Children of various ages sat in a dim, poorly lit common room, their faces marked by the particular emptiness that Michael recognized from his own recent months of existing instead of truly living. Then Ethan broke free from Michael's hand and ran desperately toward a small boy with sandy red hair and the same expressive green eyes as Ethan. "Ryan!" The reunion was heartbreaking in its absolutely desperate intensity. Ryan, who couldn't be more than 6 years old, launched himself into Ethan's arms and clung to him like he was literally his lifeline in the middle of a stormy ocean, which Michael realized with growing anger was probably exactly the case. The little boy sobbed uncontrollably against Ethan's shoulder, his small, thin body trembling with relief mixed with terror. "Ethan, they said you had gone away forever and would never come back for me." Ryan's voice was high with absolute panic, words falling over each other in desperation. "I couldn't eat yesterday or the day before. I couldn't find you anywhere at mealtime. Mrs. Patterson said you were probably hit by a car, because disobedient children always end up badly." "I'm here now, little one," Ethan soothed with the practiced gentleness of someone who had been exercising a parental role for far too long. "I'm here, and I brought someone very special to meet you, someone who's going to help us stay together forever." Director Walsh watched the emotional reunion with obvious professional disapproval. "As you can clearly see, the codependency between them is highly problematic and psychologically harmful. Ryan urgently needs to learn emotional independence and establish more age-appropriate attachment boundaries. He needs his brother's protection," Michael said with growing firmness, watching Ryan cling to Ethan as if he were the only solid and reliable thing in his completely unstable world. "And I want to adopt both of them together as an indivisible family unit." "That is absolutely out of the question," Walsh declared categorically. "Ethan is completely unsuitable for family placement due to his serious behavioral problems and demonstrated inability to integrate into appropriate structured environments. Ethan is an 8-year-old boy who has been forced to assume parental responsibilities for his traumatized younger brother because this institution has systematically failed to provide adequate emotional care." Michael's voice carried the same implacable authority that had built his business empire. "I am prepared to provide both children with a loving and stable home, first-rate education, comprehensive psychological therapy, and whatever medical or emotional resources they need to completely heal their trauma." Walsh's face hardened into ugly, threatening lines. "Mr. Thompson, I think this meeting has come to an end. You clearly don't understand the complexities involved in specialized institutional childcare." As they prepared to leave, Ryan wouldn't release his desperate grip on Ethan, his small fingers tangled in his brother's worn shirt. "Don't leave me here again," he pleaded, tears streaming freely down his face. "I can't sleep without you here. The nightmares always come back when I'm alone." "I'll come back for you," Ethan promised, with a ferocity that reminded Michael of ancient warriors making blood oaths. "I swear on Mum and Dad's memory, I'll come back for you. Mr. Michael is going to help us be a real family, a family that nobody can separate." Watching that desperate, heartbreaking goodbye, Michael made a decision that would fundamentally change everything. He wasn't just going to adopt these brave children. He was going to systematically destroy the corrupt institution that had emotionally tortured them. 3 days later, Michael's private investigator, Rebecca Martinez, spread damning photographs and documents across his dining table like evidence at a crime scene. Ethan was safely at the hotel's supervised children's club, where Michael had convinced him he needed to act like a normal child for a few hours, while adults planned their next strategic moves in what was rapidly becoming total war. "You're not going to like what I found at all," Rebecca said grimly, her experienced face serious as she organized the condemning evidence. "The Riverside Youth Facility has been under state investigation for the past 18 months. chronic shortage of qualified staff, inadequate supervision of minors, multiple allegations of systematic emotional abuse, and financial irregularities that would make your business accountant cry with rage. Michael studied the photographs with growing horror. Overcrowded dormitories with children sleeping on thin mattresses on cold concrete floors, broken and dangerous playground equipment held together with cheap duct tape, children with empty eyes, and that particular quietness that comes from having hope systematically crushed by adults in positions of power. "Why hasn't this terrible institution been shut down already?" Michael asked with controlled voice. "Corrupt politics and dirty money, the usual suspects," Rebecca replied, with the professional cynicism of someone who had investigated corruption for 2 decades. "Director Walsh has deep political connections in the State Department of Children's Services. Her brother-in-law is on the Budget Oversight Committee, plus they operate at significantly lower costs than other licensed facilities, so the state keeps sending children there to save public budget money." Rebecca pointed to a particularly damning photo of children eating what looked like prison food. But here's where it gets really interesting and sinister. 3 different families specifically requested Ryan Davis for adoption in the past 6 months. All were told that Ethan wasn't available for placement due to serious and uncontrollable behavioral problems. Behavioral problems like protecting his younger brother and asking inconvenient questions about institutional neglect, Michael said with growing anger. "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "I interviewed former staff who left completely disgusted with the institution's practices. They painted a completely different picture of Ethan. Responsible beyond his years, genuinely caring, actively helped younger children adapt to the hostile environment. He taught several children to read using smuggled books, mediated conflicts between different age groups, even organized secret birthday celebrations with candy smuggled from outside." Rebecca's expression darkened with professional anger. But he also asked too many uncomfortable questions about why siblings were being deliberately separated, why some children received preferential treatment, why adoption processes kept mysteriously failing. Michael felt his carefully controlled anger building into something truly volcanic. He was a direct threat to the profitable system of dysfunction they had created. "It gets even darker and more revolting," Rebecca continued relentlessly. "Ryan had 4 serious adoption attempts that mysteriously failed in the past year. Each time, prospective families said he was too severely traumatized, pathologically attached to his brother in an unhealthy way. He would cry uncontrollably for Ethan, refuse to eat properly, have panic attacks so severe they required emergency medical intervention." Rebecca pulled out another thick stack of documents. The last family filed an official complaint with the state, saying the institution never adequately disclosed the extent of his psychological damage that was directly caused by forcing him to live separated from his only stable attachment figure. Because they deliberately separated him from the only person in the world who could help him heal and develop normally. "There's more, and it'll break your heart," Rebecca said, her professional voice softening with genuine human compassion. "I found the original case files for Ethan and Ryan, along with detailed newspaper coverage of their parents' deaths." She handed Michael a thick folder. "House fire 2 years ago, caused by faulty electrical wiring in the middle of a winter night. Ethan woke up to the smell of smoke, managed to get Ryan out of his crib and carry him to safety through the burning house. He saved his brother's life, Michael. He was 6 years old and carried his 4-year-old brother through a house collapsing around them. Michael had to grip the edge of the table to stay standing. This brave 8-year-old child had already lost everything once, had literally carried his brother through fire to safety, and had spent 2 years desperately fighting to keep his family together in a system deliberately designed to separate them for financial profit. Rebecca, I need you to investigate deeper into everything. Walsh's personal finances, family connections of board members, state funding patterns, history of failed adoptions at other similar facilities. If they want to play with these innocent children's lives, they're going to quickly discover what real power looks like when it's properly motivated and furious. Ooh. When Ethan returned that night from the children's club, chattering animatedly about making new friends and learning origami, he found Michael on the phone, coordinating an impressive army of allies. His main corporate lawyer, influential political contacts, award-winning investigative journalists, and 4 different child advocacy organizations. "Is everything okay?" Ethan asked quietly, his newfound happiness quickly diminishing as he read the obvious tension in Michael's voice and posture. Michael hung up the phone and knelt to Ethan's eye level, taking his small, cold hands in his. "Ethan, how would you feel about never having to worry about being separated from Ryan again? About having a real home where you're both completely safe and unconditionally loved?" Ethan's eyes lit up with hope and terror in equal devastating measure. "What do you mean exactly? Are you really going to manage to be our real dad?" "I mean, I'm going to ensure that you and Ryan come home with me where you belong as my legal children," Michael said with absolute conviction. "But I need you to trust me completely, because this legal fight is going to get much uglier and more complicated before it definitely gets better." Ethan straightened his small shoulders with determination that reminded Michael of every successful business battle he had ever fought, every impossible deal he had closed through pure refusal to accept defeat. "I trust you more than anyone in the world," Ethan said with impressive maturity. "And I'm not afraid of ugly or complicated. I've been living in ugly for 2 whole years, and I'm ready to fight for something truly beautiful for the first time." As Michael tucked Ethan into the luxurious guest bedroom that night, reading him a story about families that stay together no matter what obstacles they face, he had no idea that Director Walsh was already planning her vicious and calculated counterattack. The phone call that would threaten to destroy everything they were building was coming in less than 12 hours. The call came at 6:45 in the morning, pulling Michael from the first genuinely peaceful sleep he had had in 15 months. Sleep that had come from the peace of finally having a clear purpose beyond mere emotional survival. "Mr. Thompson," the voice was official, cold, carrying all the intimidating authority of federal law enforcement. "This is Detective Linda Rodriguez of the Detroit Police Department. We need to speak with you immediately about Ethan and Ryan Davis." Michael's blood instantly turned to ice. "The minors you have been illegally harboring in your hotel. We need you and the boy to report to Central Headquarters immediately for interrogation about serious charges of kidnapping, deliberate interference with state legal custody, and intentional endangerment of children." An hour and a half later, Michael sat in a sterile interrogation room that smelled of industrial cleaning product and the accumulated despair of thousands of previous interrogations. Ethan was pressed nervously against his side, both facing Detective Rodriguez, a direct woman in her 40s, and a sharp-looking woman introduced as Karen Phillips from the Department of Child Protective Services. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Rodriguez began formally, consulting a thick file full of documents. "You are facing possible very serious federal criminal charges, deliberately interfering with established legal custody, knowingly harboring a minor fugitive, and potentially kidnapping charges that could result in decades in federal prison. I helped a scared child who desperately asked for protection from a clearly dangerous situation. You knowingly helped a minor child evade legitimate legal authorities and established legal custody," Phillips interrupted with oily smoothness. "Ethan was officially reported missing from legal state custody for 5 consecutive days. During this period, his brother Ryan was immediately placed with a pre-approved adoptive family that can provide structured and appropriate care." Ethan gasped audibly, his small body going completely rigid with absolute terror. "No, you can't have taken Ryan. I promised I'd come back for him. He can't survive without me." "Ethan," Phillips's voice assumed that artificially gentle, patronizing tone that made Michael's skin literally crawl with disgust. "Sometimes promises simply can't be kept by children who don't fully understand adult responsibilities and complexities." Ryan is now in a wonderful, stable home with qualified people who can provide adequate structure and professional care without the emotional burden of a codependent and psychologically harmful sibling relationship. "I provide adequate care?" Ethan's voice cracked with desperate fury that broke Michael's heart. "I've been taking care of him since he was 4. I saved him from the fire that killed our parents. He won't eat or sleep right without me there to ensure his safety. He'll think I abandoned him like everyone abandoned him." Michael felt incandescent rage growing in his chest like molten metal. Where exactly is Ryan located now? Phillips exchanged a significant conspiratorial look with Detective Rodriguez. "That information is strictly confidential for the child's protection. But I can personally guarantee he's receiving excellent professional care from a thoroughly examined family with extensive experience in specialized child trauma." "What family specifically? What are their exact qualifications? How long have they been approved by the state?" Michael pressed intensely, his sharp business instincts screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with these deliberate evasions. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Rodriguez leaned forward intimidatingly, "your primary concern should be avoiding serious criminal charges that could completely destroy your personal life and carefully built business empire. We're prepared to be lenient if you cooperate fully and return Ethan to appropriate state custody immediately without further interference or legal obstructions." Michael looked at Ethan, who was trying so desperately to be brave in the face of hostile adults. His small fists were clenched with white knuckles in his lap, tears streaming silently down his cheeks as he fought not to collapse completely. Everything in Michael violently rebelled against the idea of handing this brave child back to people who saw him as a problem to be eliminated, rather than a boy to be loved and protected. "I want to speak with my lawyer immediately, and I won't say another word without legal representation present, Mr. Thompson," Phillips said with that oily professional smoothness. "Dragging this through expensive and time-consuming legal maneuvers will only traumatize Ethan further and make his eventual reintegration into appropriate state care much more difficult and painful for everyone involved." "Reintegration into what exactly? A system that has systematically failed him from the traumatic moment he entered it?" Phillips's carefully maintained professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something genuinely ugly and vindictive underneath the polished surface. "The system works highly effectively for children who work constructively with it and follow established protocols. Ethan has shown consistent inability to adapt to necessary structure and legitimate authority that all children in care need to learn. Ethan has shown extraordinary courage protecting his younger brother in an institutional environment that deliberately tried to destroy their fundamental family bond for pure financial and bureaucratic convenience." "Mr. Thompson," Detective Rodriguez's tone became sharply threatening, "you have exactly 10 minutes to make a final decision. Cooperate completely right now, and we'll consider this a regrettable but forgivable misunderstanding. Continue obstructing established legal procedures, and you'll be formally arrested for multiple federal crimes, including deliberately endangering a vulnerable child." Michael felt the carefully constructed trap closing around them like a cage of tempered steel. But when Ethan looked at him with absolute trust shining in his green eyes, trust that clearly said Michael was the first and only adult who had ever truly fought for him, Michael realized something fundamental that changed the entire game. He wasn't simply fighting for legal custody anymore. He was fighting for pure justice, and he had financial and political resources these people couldn't even begin to imagine. "Detective Rodriguez," Michael said with absolutely deadly calm, Before we continue with any procedures, I want to officially report multiple ongoing crimes: systematic institutional child abuse, deliberate and calculated infliction of psychological trauma on minors, criminal conspiracy to separate siblings for direct financial gain, and extensive fraud in state adoption procedures. And I possess comprehensive and irrefutable physical evidence of all these accusations. Phillips visibly paled, her professional composure finally cracking. Mr. Thompson, you're making completely unfounded and potentially slanderous accusations that could constitute criminal defamation against dedicated public servants. Am I? Michael picked up his phone with calculated surgical precision. Because I'm absolutely certain that the local FBI office would be absolutely fascinated with Rebecca Martinez's detailed investigation into Riverside Youth Facility's systematic financial irregularities, the meticulously documented pattern of deliberately sabotaged adoptions, and the systematic institutional abuse of extremely vulnerable children. As the adults stared at each other across the table in electrically tense silence, Ethan whispered something that stopped everyone instantly. Ryan isn't really with a legal-approved family, is he? He's still at Riverside, probably in the isolation room where they put children who cry too loudly or ask too many inconvenient questions. The deadly silence that followed told Michael absolutely everything he needed to know. The real war was just beginning to heat up, and now he knew exactly what kind of monsters he was facing. But Ethan had just revealed something even more important. He knew much more about the institution's dark and illegal secrets than any of them had realized. Secrets that could potentially bring down the entire corrupt system once and for all. Within 3 hours of Ethan's devastating revelation about the isolation room, Michael had mobilized a crisis team that would have impressed any Fortune 500 emergency management firm. His penthouse suite had been completely transformed into a high-tech war room with laptops, legal documents strategically scattered, and a direct line to award-winning investigative journalist Sarah Chen of the Detroit Free Press. "Ethan," Michael said with infinite gentleness, kneeling beside the boy as he sat curled up on the panoramic window seat. "I need you to tell me absolutely everything you know about this isolation room, every detail you can remember. Can you do that for Ryan and for all the other children still trapped there?" Ethan's eyes were red and swollen from crying, but his voice remained steady with the terrible wisdom of a child who had witnessed too many cruelties. "It's in the lower basement, past the industrial laundry, where they make us work without pay for hours. Mrs. Walsh puts children there when they misbehave or ask questions she doesn't like. That means crying for your dead parents, asking about siblings, or trying to call relatives who might be alive." He wiped his nose with his sleeve, taking a deep breath before continuing. "There are no windows, just cold concrete walls, a thin, dirty mattress on the floor, and a plastic bucket for needs. They give you one small meal a day, usually just bread and water, and tell you to think about your inappropriate behavior until you learn to obey." Michael's hands clenched into tight fists of controlled fury. "How long do children stay locked there?" "It depends on how sorry and obedient you can pretend to be," Ethan explained with a coldness that chilled Michael's blood. "Marcus Williams was there for a whole week last month because he wouldn't stop asking if he could call his grandmother, who lived in another state. When he finally got out, he didn't talk to anyone for entire weeks. He just sat staring at the wall like he had died inside." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper loaded with guilt. "Ryan has been there 4 times before I learned to prevent them from taking him. That's why I always have to cause bigger problems and ask more inconvenient questions. It keeps all their attention and anger focused on me instead of on Ryan." Sarah Chen looked up from her laptop, where she was coordinating with investigative photographers and legal experts in child abuse, her experienced journalist face visibly pale with genuine shock. "Michael, if this is true, and every detail Ethan is providing is consistent with known patterns of institutional abuse, We're talking about systematic psychological torture on a scale that could bring down not just Riverside, but the entire state oversight system. This isn't simple bureaucratic negligence. This is deliberate and calculated torture. Michael's phone buzzed urgently with an encrypted message from Rebecca Martinez. Absolute emergency. Found Ryan. Critical situation. Come now. Bringing federal backup. 25 minutes later, an intimidating convoy of Michael's black SUVs stopped in front of the Riverside Youth Facility, followed closely by Sarah's news van and 4 official FBI vehicles that Rebecca had somehow convinced to join the improvised rescue operation. Director Walsh met them at the main entrance, her face contorted in a mask of barely disguised fury and growing panic. You have absolutely no legal authority here, Thompson. This is criminal harassment of a licensed state institution. Michael walked directly toward Walsh, his voice deadly quiet but loaded with palpable threat. Where is Ryan Davis exactly at this moment? That child is receiving appropriate corrective disciplinary guidance for his recent serious behavioral problems. Where is he? Michael's roar echoed through the cold institutional corridors, making several children peer around doors in a mixture of terror and hopeful fascination. Rebecca appeared instantly at Michael's side, her face grim with professional determination. Basement level, 3rd door past the industrial washing machines. Michael, she shook her head gravely, just prepare yourself mentally. What we're going to find isn't something any child should endure. The isolation room was exactly everything Ethan had described in horrible detail, and even worse, in raw reality. Ryan sat in a dark corner, his thin, pale arms wrapped defensively around his knees, rocking slightly in a rhythm Michael recognized as a traumatic survival mechanism. The boy seemed to have aged years in the 5 days since Michael had seen him, his small face gaunt from obvious dehydration and prolonged terror. When he saw adults entering the claustrophobic room, Ryan pressed himself even further against the cold concrete wall. "Please don't hurt me anymore today," he whispered, with a broken voice that shouldn't exist in a 6-year-old child. "I'll be obedient and quiet. I won't cry for Ethan anymore or ask when I can see him. I promise to be good." Michael had never experienced rage like what filled him in that devastating moment. This wasn't simply normal anger. It was a fundamental transformation in his understanding of what he was capable of protecting, destroying, and rebuilding. He knelt very slowly beside Ryan, his voice infinitely gentle, despite the nuclear fury burning in his chest. "Ryan, do you remember me? I'm Michael, Ethan's friend. He sent me here to take you home, to stay with him forever." Ryan's green eyes widened with hope so desperate it almost destroyed Michael emotionally. "Ethan, is he really alive and well? They said he was dead, that he was hit by a truck because bad children who run away always end up dead on the street." "Ethan is completely safe and waiting anxiously for you right now," Michael promised solemnly, extending his hand with infinite patience. "He never stopped fighting to get back to you. He never doubted for a second that you would be together again." As Ryan launched himself into Michael's arms with the desperate force of a child who was literally drowning and finally found solid ground, Michael made a sacred oath that would completely reshape his entire life going forward. He wouldn't just destroy the Riverside Youth Facility to its foundations. He would personally ensure that no child would ever suffer like this again, anywhere in the country. Behind them, Sarah Chen documented every second with the relentless thoroughness of a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who had just discovered the defining story of her career. Director Walsh's reign of terror was about to become front-page headlines in newspapers across the country. But first, Michael had 2 brave children to take home to permanent safety and a war of justice to finish once and for all. 6 months after the most intense legal battle of his life, Michael stood in Judge Patricia Hamilton's dignified courtroom, watching Ethan nervously adjust the collar of his new dress shirt, while Ryan practiced carefully writing his new legal name, Ryan Thompson, in his best first-grader handwriting. The final adoption hearing was scheduled to begin in exactly 10 minutes, legally formalizing what had been emotionally true in their hearts since that snowy December day when a desperate little boy asked a stranger to pretend to hug him. "Mr. Thompson," said Judge Hamilton with genuine warmth, carefully reviewing the extremely detailed file before her. "In 35 years presiding over this court, I have never witnessed an adoption case remotely like this one. Ethan and Ryan, do you fully understand what's happening today?" Ethan straightened with the natural composure he had developed through months of intensive family therapy and emotional healing. "Yes, Your Honor. Today, you're going to make it official and legal that Mr. Michael is our father forever, and we're going to officially become the Thompson family for real." Ryan looked up from his careful, concentrated writing. "And nobody can separate us ever again, right? Not even if I still have nightmares sometimes, or Ethan asks his smart questions that some adults don't like." Judge Hamilton's eyes filled with genuine tenderness. "That's right, Ryan. Today you become a family forever, legally and emotionally, and absolutely nobody in the world can change that." The courtroom was packed with an extraordinary collection of supporters and witnesses. FBI Special Agent Lisa Cooper and her investigative team, who had become true friends of the family during months of investigation. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had guided the three through challenging but transformative months of psychological healing. Sarah Chen, whose Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative series had triggered comprehensive national reforms in the child welfare system. And most touching of all, dozens of rescued children and their new families who existed today thanks directly to Ethan and Ryan's exceptional courage. But Michael's eyes were inevitably drawn to the back row, where former director Margaret Walsh sat handcuffed between two federal officers. She now faced life imprisonment for her central role in an abuse network that extended across 6 states. But Michael had specifically requested her presence for reasons that went far beyond mere legal procedures. "Margaret Walsh," Judge Hamilton addressed the defendant directly with absolute authority. "You formally requested to make a statement before this adoption is finalized. The court will hear your words. But I clearly warn that any attempt to interrupt or contaminate these proceedings will result in immediate and permanent removal." Walsh rose slowly, her face dramatically gaunt after months in federal custody. When she spoke, her voice had completely lost all its former intimidating authority. "I need these extraordinary children to know something important," she began, looking directly at Ethan and Ryan with eyes filled with genuine tears. "For years, I convinced myself I was preparing children for the real world, that making them strong meant breaking them first through harsh discipline. But watching this investigation unfold, seeing the impressive achievements you've accomplished, witnessing the hundreds of children you saved through your courage," her voice broke completely into sobs. "You were never broken and didn't need to be fixed. You were the bravest and most resilient children I ever met. And I was too damaged by my own traumatic childhood to recognize true strength when it was right in front of me." Ethan quietly rose from his chair, walked with dignity through the silent courtroom, and stopped directly in front of Walsh. The entire room collectively held its breath as this 8-year-old boy courageously faced the woman who had systematically tormented him for 2 years. "Mrs. Walsh," Ethan said with powerful quietness, "I forgive you completely. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying hate would make me smaller as a person, and I'll be too busy being happy and helping other children to waste energy being small or vindictive." The silence that followed was deeply healing and transformative. Walsh collapsed back into her chair, sobbing with what sounded like genuine remorse for the first time in her entire adult life. Judge Hamilton discreetly cleared her own emotional eyes before continuing with the ceremony. "Ethan Davis and Ryan Davis, by the legal power invested in me by the state of Michigan, I officially and permanently declare you adopted by Michael Thompson. Your legal names are now Ethan Thompson and Ryan Thompson, and you are forever members of the Thompson family." The courtroom exploded in enthusiastic applause and tears of joy. Michael knelt as both children simultaneously launched themselves into his arms, holding them as if he could physically absorb all their past pain and replace it with pure, unconditional love. "We're really a real family now," Ryan whispered in complete wonder. "We were always a family," Michael replied, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. "The legal papers just made it official for the rest of the world." Later that night, as they celebrated in their new home, a spacious, welcoming house in Birmingham, with a huge yard for playing and extra bedrooms for all the rescued children who visited regularly, Ethan found Michael standing in his office, looking thoughtfully at a framed photograph on his desk. "Is that Emma?" Ethan asked with natural sensitivity. Michael nodded, easily lifting Ethan into his arms. "Yes, son. This is your mother, Emma. I think she would have loved you and Ryan more than words can express. Do you think she's sad because we're your children now instead of the babies she wanted to have with you?" Michael considered the question with all the seriousness it deserved. "Ethan, I deeply believe Emma sent you two to me on that exact day when you desperately needed help. I think she knew I needed to learn to love again and knew you needed someone with resources to fight fiercely for you. I'm certain she's watching us and smiling with pride." Ethan studied Emma's photograph with thoughtful consideration. "She looks like the kind of gentle person who would love for her husband to save children who needed to be saved. That's exactly the type of extraordinary person she was." Ryan appeared in the office doorway, dragging his favorite blanket behind him. "Dad Michael, will you read our special story today, the one about the family that saves each other?" It had become their most sacred nightly ritual, a story Michael had written especially about a businessman who thought he had nothing left to live for, until two brave children showed him that true love multiplies exponentially when you share it generously. As they settled into the cozy reading corner Michael had built especially in their new family room, surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the absolute safety of home, Michael reflected deeply on how dramatically his life had changed since that snowy December day. The Emma Thompson Foundation for Child Protection had rescued over 1,200 children globally, completely reformed child welfare laws in 15 different states, and provided specialized healing services to thousands of devastated families. Ethan had started a revolutionary support group for rescued children, teaching them the same unwavering courage he had learned protecting Ryan. Ryan had begun speaking at national conferences, his pure innocence helping adults truly understand the unique perspective of vulnerable children. But the most profound and significant transformation was Michael's own. The empty, grieving man who wandered Detroit's icy streets, desperately searching for a reason to continue existing, had become a dedicated father, tireless advocate, and relentless warrior for justice. All because a brave 8-year-old boy asked him to pretend to hug him. "Dad," Ethan said as Michael finished the family story, "do you think there are other children out there who need families like we needed you?" "I'm absolutely certain there are, son. Why are you asking?" Ethan and Ryan exchanged that special look Michael had learned, meant they were planning something simultaneously wonderful and probably financially expensive. "Well," Ethan said carefully, choosing his words with precision, "Ryan and I were talking that this house is really too big for just 3 people, and we know many children who still desperately need safe homes, and we've gotten very good at being protective big brothers now." Michael looked at his extraordinary children, survivors who had become natural healers, victims who had transformed into heroes, children who had once been broken, but who had taught him to become whole again. "Are you seriously suggesting we expand the Thompson family even further?" "Only if you really want to," Ryan said quickly, always worried about being a burden. "We know we're probably enough work for any normal dad." Michael pulled both children close to him, completely overwhelmed by their infinite capacity to love after everything they had endured and survived. "Ethan Thompson and Ryan Thompson, you are never, ever too much work for me. You are the greatest gifts I've ever received in life. And if you want to generously share our family with other children who desperately need unconditional love, then that's exactly what we'll do together. As spring rain fell gently outside their warm and completely safe home, Michael remembered another stormy night when a desperate hug had irreversibly changed 3 lives forever. Now, surrounded by his children's genuine laughter and actively planning to open their hearts to even more children who needed families, he finally understood a fundamental truth. Love wasn't something that diminished when you shared it. Love was something that grew exponentially stronger each time you chose to share it selflessly. And the Thompson family was just beginning their transformation journey. 2 years later, as Michael watched Ethan, now 10, patiently teaching 3 newly adopted siblings to play chess, and Ryan, now 8, reading stories to 5-year-old twins who still only spoke in whispers, he realized something profound. His home had become a refuge for 8 children who had once been considered too problematic or too old for adoption. Each with their own survival story, each contributing their own unique form of light to this extraordinary family they had built together. The phone rang. It was Sarah Chen calling with news about the approval of a new federal child protection law that would bear Ethan and Ryan's names. Reforms that would ensure no child would ever be separated from siblings for bureaucratic convenience. "Mr. Thompson," came the cheerful voice of his new assistant, Elena, an 18-year-old who had grown up in the system and now coordinated the Foundation's adoption programs. "We have 15 newly certified families this week, and the training center in Denver is officially open." Michael smiled, watching his house filled with laughter, homework discussions, and the kind of loving chaos that only large families truly know. On the living room wall, a framed photo showed Emma smiling, and Michael was certain she was smiling at all of this, because sometimes, when you're lost and hopeless, all you need is a brave child who asks you to pretend to hug them. And sometimes, when you pretend to hug someone, you discover the hug becomes real, and that some of the world's best families begin exactly like that, with strangers who choose to care for each other when they need it most. And if you were also moved by this incredible journey of transformation and hope, leave your like so more people can know this story that reminds us of the power of compassion. Want more heartwarming narratives that make us believe in human goodness? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to not miss any of these stories that restore our faith in humanity. Now, we really want to know your honest opinion in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a moment where a simple gesture of kindness completely changed someone's life? Tell your story to our community. And remember to share this video with someone who needs a dose of hope and to believe that small acts of courage can transform the entire world. See you in the next story, where we'll continue exploring how unconditional love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds and create families where we least expect to find them.